thank you so much for taking time out. We're obviously here to talk about the day of the fight. I guess a lot of people, you're better known as an actor, but we're here today to talk about your directorial debut, a film which you wrote as well as directing. How did the idea for this story come together, and what was it about it that made you decide that this was the film that you wanted to move into directing with?
Um, it's interesting. I think first and foremost, I'm somebody who has brought my kids up sort of the way I was brought up, which is I always start at the beginning. So I played, I was very lucky that I was given a wonderful history of film growing up and watching all the what they call the old movies. But I loved. When films were a little simpler. I think they were more character based. I think it was about the person, about you're watching these actors exist. It wasn't very, which I love films like this, but special effects driven or I think they were about the human struggle. I think they're very relatable. I think it's what made me fall in love with films were these, rather impactful movies that I watched and they made me feel something. And I feel like sometimes in today's world, we're not given an opportunity to feel as much, just the simplicity of feeling. And it's a lot about shock value, and it's a lot about sort of like how much can I scare you or shock you or creep you out, whatever that is. And by the way, I enjoy a good film like that, like anyone else, but I don't think one has to exist without the other. So when I was sort of in COVID, I did a bit of a deep dive on some things. I came across a documentary short of Kubrick's, which was just about a boxer on the day of a prize fight. It's 20 minutes, nothing much happens. It's, I'm going to be honest, quite boring. And then I thought, well, actually, some of the great films, the idea itself is simple. You just have to turn the notch one thing. And I said, well, what if that day was his last day? What if that boxer was the only one who knew that, by all chances, he's going to die in the ring that night? So it took me on this wonderful sort of journey of if you only had one day, what would you do? Who would you speak to? What would you say? And if you'd done something terrible in your life, but you weren't a terrible person. If you'd done something bad, if you'd made a mistake, like we all do, because it's a human trait, we're never without mistakes. We're all going to do the wrong thing. But what if that's on the outset? You'd done something terrible, but you, it was sort of a saintly act that last day. It's sort of like going about of like what you've learned. It's about that idea of forgiveness, about that idea of redemption. And I started writing it and it just sort of fell out of me. I wrote it over 10 days. It was very much a lot of relationships I'd had. So a lot of it sort of taken from my life. I had some conversations with Michael and yeah, we sort of ended up where what I wrote over those 10 days is sort of pretty much on the screen. There's not much has changed.
Wow. And like you said, you mentioned Michael, you have your former Boardwalk Empire co-star Michael Pitt starring
Yeah.
as having, previously acted alongside him, what was it about him that made you certain that he could deliver this complex performance that was required for the character? I mean, he's in like every scene, the film is almost like a walk along with him, so I'm guessing that he was integral to the rest of the film working.
I wouldn't have made it without him. I wrote it every word with his voice in my head. Um, it's funny. I loved working with Michael as an actor just because I found him the most giving
Mm.
when I was in a scene with him. There's something about him also. He has this rather hard exterior, but inside there's this innocence, there's this vulnerability, there's this sensitivity that sort of the more you get to know him, you really understand Michael's a beautiful human. He's kind, he's very thoughtful. He has his downfalls like we all do, and he has certain things that sort of led him astray or whatever. And I just found the character, it wouldn't have worked without him. It's such an amazing thing when you get that, where you're writing for someone and you go, actually, well, if it's not Michael, it's no one. There's no reason to make this film because it's such a key element. And I think that's always when great things are made, is when it's absolute resounding belief in something. And this film is, made up of certain things, and probably the largest piece of the pie being Mikey. I mean, like you said, every step of the way you're with him on this story, and you have to believe it. You have to go with him, and it's not an easy task, but it's done with such grace and such power. And he's sort of, I always say, if his name was Brad Pitt, not Michael Pitt, he'd be standing with an Oscar come Sunday. I mean, it's that good of a performance, and I think that's as much because we put our trust in each other, and we have such a wonderful shorthand that we made something quite beautiful, I think.
Mm. Yeah, and I mean he's been a phenomenal actor, even sort of going back to like Dawson's Creek, he was just sort of a small character in that, but he had, like you say, he had that vulnerability to him,
Yeah.
even back then, that sort of like charm to him. So it's quite nice to see that he's kind of kept that spirit as he's, progressed through the industry.
Yeah, absolutely. He is. It does. It sort of seeps out every pore. It's like you kind of want to protect Michael. It's like to everyone that takes it on, they're just like that. Everyone feels the same way. They're like, I don't know. He just feels like this. When I say like a childlike innocence, I mean that with, because he's a very powerful human being too. But there's something that you feel that very protective over him because you don't want him to change in essence, and he is so who he is. So it was one of the great working relationships. And as it's very nice to write. My grandfather always used to say 90% of making a film is casting. So, I say no truer words have ever been spoken when I made this movie. And that comes for every character that I put in it. Like, I can't imagine without anyone who was already in the movie.
Yeah, I mean that's kind of my next question that I've got down here. You've got this, as Mike goes about his day, you've got this almost never-ending conveyor belt of exceptional talent. A lot of whom you've been fortunate to work with throughout your career. How on earth did you go about organizing a cast of this caliber, but also, there doesn't appear to be any ego, which I think, when you've considered, the prestige of some of the actors you've got, there'd, I guess, be the assumption that, maybe someone would come in with ego about, oh no, I need a bigger part. But here it seems that everybody was just game to just come in and help.
You're absolutely right. And that says so much about each one of those actors, which it all starts with script, and they were all taken with the story. And when I say they turned up and have been incredible throughout the entire process, every single one of them. Um, yeah, it's funny. I think everybody saw it as an opportunity to make something that we're not making anymore. It's like we said, it is that homage to a type of cinema that doesn't exist, or at least should exist, but is kind of being a bit washed out right now. It's the idea that human interaction isn't as interesting as, you know, shock value, horror, special effects. I'm like, this is where it all came from. This is what inspired me to want to get into this business. I wanted to make something so authentic, so from the heart, something that really explored the idea of the spoken word, of the true human interactions. That's one of the reasons we put it in in the late 80s, because it took away all the technology and it was like no mobile phones, none of that. But you really have to go and see someone and visit them to say what's on your mind, and there's something to that. But all these actors, I mean, I got to say, like, to get Joe Pesci is pretty much the hardest. I think if you said to about 10 of the studios, you said, who's the hardest actor to get? They probably, each one of them would probably put Joe at the top of the list. And surprisingly, Joe was so taken with the script and came on as an executive producer. And he was even the one who pitched me to play the taxi driver and sort of be in that sort of area as well. That was as much his idea. He was like, well, he's got the same name as the dad. I should appear there too. So I was like, wow, Joe's pitching me playing a second character right now. This is amazing.
Right. And music plays such a an integral part to the film as well. There's several sequences where you see, Mike walking around and is listening to music, and the songs on his Walkman seem to sync up with, whatever he's thinking, or what's going on. How did you go about selecting these songs, and were any of them in that original script? So they were kind of, like sort of brought into creation then.
Yeah, I wrote them in the script. They were needle drops within the script. It was said at this moment, this begins to play, this starts here. Even right up to me going and recording the Creedence Clearwater, Have You Ever Seen the Rain with Nicolette, like every single one of those were in the script, and the score was done by my brother-in-law Ben McDermott, who lives in England and in Norfolk in the country, and it's his first time scoring a film. But I just knew that he was gonna knock it out the park because he's such a beautiful soul and a wonderful musician. And I sent him the movie and I said, listen, if it moves you the way I hope it will, you want to take a crack at it. So it was a big jump, but boy, I think his score is going to really go down. I think he's going to have an incredible career because of it. Because you're right, the music in the film is another character. The score is another character. The film doesn't exist without it. It's like taking away New York City. Like the film only exists in the place where it takes place. It's that each one of these elements are another character in the movie. So
And I guess sort of my final question to you, why do you hope the audience to take a chance on this film? I know that, we've sort of said it's something that we unfortunately don't see a lot of anymore. There's very different films out these days, but why do you hope that they take a chance on this film?
I think we all want to be moved. I think we all want to experience something. I think there's something about leaving a theater and that sensation you have in your stomach, which I remember countless times happening to me when I was younger. And I think as I said, we're moving a little bit away from that. But I think there's nothing more exciting than having a shared experience with a bunch of strangers. You know what I mean? I love that feeling of going into the theater and waking up in the morning and it still sits with you. It still resonates. I think this is a timeless picture, a timeless film that over everything, it's not a boxing movie, it's a film about a boxer, it's about a man, it's about the relationships that we can all relate to. And, how far would you go for the ones you love? And that's the truth of it. So I just, if you want to be moved and you want to really have an experience, this is like without question the film to go see right now. And we've luckily had the support of so many great filmmakers who many of them said it was their favorite film of the last year. They've just been so incredibly supportive because there's a certain amount of I think a lot of people sort of regret that we're not making these movies, and hopefully this will mean that we'll get to make more of them.
And yeah, I definitely hope so. And I look forward to seeing what you make next.
Oh, thank you so much, Kat. That's very kind.